So one of the questions that I most focus on is how most effectively to call out and challenge corporate power, how to take it on and how to win in the face of it, particularly in a state like Florida, which, from my vantage point here in Orlando is just about the most corporate captured state in the entire country, a place whose economy at this point basically exists on grinding workers down into dust. So today on the podcast, I'm going to be joined by a couple of folks who I think have done more than anybody else I can think of in recent years to call out corporate power, call out corporate abuses, to push back against it effectively, and even to win when it is arrayed in every way against them. So I hope you'll enjoy the conversation. Hello, and welcome to Seeking Rents, the podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garcia. I am the publisher of Seeking Rents. That's a newsletter and podcast in Florida about state politics, but with a particular emphasis on the ways big businesses and other special interests influence public policy in this state. The name Seeking Rents comes from a term in economics called rent seeking. And rent seeking is what's happening when someone with lots of wealth and influence, like a big business or a billionaire, uses that wealth and influence to get laws changed in their favor in a way that allows them to capture even more wealth and influence for themselves, usually at the expense of someone else. So we've got an awesome show for you today. I'm going to be joined by two of my very favorite people in the world, the first twins of Florida politics, Anna and Ida Eskamani. Anna is just about to start her fourth and final term in the Florida State House, representing a district right here in Orlando. And Ida is a senior director with the State Innovation Exchange. That's a progressive policy group that works with state legislatures across the country to advance goals like fairer tax codes for working families and busting up corporate monopolies, that sort of thing. Listen, Anna and Ida are two of the smartest, hardest working, kindest, funniest people I have ever met in any walk of life, let alone politics. Now, I am admittedly quite biased here. I've become very close to the Eskamanis over the years, and so much so that I genuinely do consider them part of my chosen family at this point. But you know what? You can decide for yourself how awesome they are based on this conversation. Before we get to it, though, don't forget to click the like and subscribe button so you never miss an episode of the show. And if in listening to the conversation that follows, which is going to be really focus a lot on corporate power in Florida and how to effectively push back against it, if it triggers any thoughts, make sure to leave a comment below. Okay, with that out of the way, here's the show with Anna and Ida Eskamani. Anna and Ida Eskamani, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Jason.
Thank you very much. Well, okay, so where I want to start with you guys is normally I try like really hard to stay focused on Florida politics just because God knows there's plenty of people doing national politics, but I feel like it's impossible to look away from some of what we're seeing out of DC, particularly when, we're looking at the prospect of a Matt Gaetz as Attorney General. I think I'd like to get your guys' take on that and just sort of what we've seen so far out of the Trump administration and some of the Florida moving north stuff. Who wants to go first?
Anna, let me toss it to you, and then you know a lot about Matt Gaetz.
Wow, we're not going to start there. Absolutely not. I mean, the obvious process happening right now, right, is loyalty pays off. So right. All of these appointments that we're seeing out of Florida, these are folks who are committed to Donald Trump. I mean, whether it was opportunistic for them or ideologically driven for them, they have been yes people from Donald Trump's rise to today, and they're being rewarded for that, which is really scary because, when Trump first ran for office and won in 2016, there were folks in his administration that maybe today we say they were moderate, but they just weren't always consenting to his extreme agenda. That's not the case anymore. These are folks who are 100% committed to what he campaigned on, and they're not going to serve as any checks and balances. And of course, it also sets a ripple effect in Florida because a lot of these members of Congress are going to create special elections, and I'm sure many state reps will run for those seats, so there'll be open elections and special elections again. But I mean, what really concerns me is just the lack of qualifications among these individuals. And of course, it's very ironic because the Republican Party loves to talk about meritocracy, and these are not appointments based on merit at all.
Right, right.
Yeah, I think I would add to that the just complete corporate capture of public institutions, the privatization of everything that we're going to be seeing. And again, Florida's been a laboratory for that. Like it's been a laboratory of like weaponization of state agencies and then also just complete corporate capture of so many essential public institutions. And Donald Trump has no plan for the working class. Like his agenda is not one that serves working families. He ran a campaign of divide and conquer tactics that scapegoated Black folks, immigrants, women, trans folks for the various economic struggles caused by like corporations and billionaires. So he ran like an economic campaign, but when you look at the nitty gritty of his platform and also his appointments, putting like fossil fuel industry reps in these like essential environmental agencies, so forth. I mean, it's just the complete corporate capture of the federal government. And if Project 2025 comes to fruition and they, weaponize and or eliminate like essential agencies, that'll have dramatic effects across the country in states like ours. And so, yeah, there's that loyalty piece that on it. You're absolutely right. And then also you see just like the grift in Florida moving north in the sense of folks just monetizing our tax dollars and like centralizing their power. So yeah, there's a lot, but
we also talk about the irony that this new Department of Governmental Efficiency, which by the way, we see this type of rhetoric from Republicans in Florida too. They always have legislation that's like, oh, if you're going to create new regulation, you have to do an efficiency report. And it's so ironic because meanwhile, New College gets pumped with public money. Public money goes to the governor's trafficking of asylum seekers. And all this public money went to advertise against Amendment 4, Amendment 3. And I would argue that all of that is fiscally irresponsible. But can we just highlight the fact that this government efficiency department requires 2 dudes to lead it? And it's like, how is that efficient? Like, oh my God, it's just such a grift. But of course, it's a scary one because all the rhetoric that was on the campaign trail, and of course, the folks that are getting these positions that align with it, they are going to pursue policies that will damage essential institutions, target marginalized people, and as I just said, not actually solve the challenges that Floridians in particular, but Americans overall are facing.
Yeah, to your point about this, about the sort of the grift of the Department of Governmental Efficiency, like the oldest sort of like talking point in playbooks for like when a politician has no actual plans, they just talk about how they're going to solve everything by finding all the waste, fraud, and abuse, right? Like I think to, a lot of the Republican State House campaign commercials we saw this year were all talking about solving the insurance crisis by setting up a task force to find fraud, right? Like, you've been in control for 25 years. I think you would have rooted out the fraud if you could have, at this point.
Right.
It's just pure like pandering and like performance rather than accomplishing anything. And then there's also just we've tasked the largest government contractor in the country with determining where the government should cut spending. Like, how is that anything other than just grift? And like, how does anybody trust that? Like, I suspect he's not going to find any problems with like the SpaceX contracts or the Starlink contracts.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right. Well, and also, to be clear, government has a lot of needs for improvement, but oftentimes it comes down to the lack of constituent services.
Right.
I mean, Florida serves as the worst example of that. When it comes to families being able to access food stamps and employment compensation, I mean, our legislative office is still inundated with those claims. And then, of course, the Step Up for Students program, we have families who are not getting reimbursed. And that's a so-called private-public partnership. And so, I mean, I can give you a full list of areas of improvement, but candidly, it's not about cutting resources. It's actually about reallocating resources towards those direct services that our taxpayer constituents deserve. And you don't need to create a whole department to know that. It's very clear.
Yeah, I think the thing that I think about a lot is that government is very efficient, which is not for us. It's efficient for the corporate class, for the ultra wealthy. It takes forever to get your unemployment benefits, and even then they're measly. But when they roll out the corporate tax cut, that is delivered immediately.
They set that up to happen automatically.
That's right. So government can be very efficient. The narrative that government is inefficient is one that is put forward by folks who have an incentive to deregulate government because they want to make more profit off of our tax dollars. Like ultimately, this is the deregulation agenda from like top to bottom, right? And that is going to be so detrimental to like workers, public health, the air we breathe, right? Like just these like basic necessities that regulations are designed to protect us from. And it's not going to lead to like a more affordable housing market to just deregulate and further allow corporate landlords to do whatever they want, right? Like
Right.
that doesn't
Right.
make sense. But
Well, if it did, it won't be a safe building.
Right.
Right?
that's
Like,
right.
yeah, maybe it'll be a little bit cheaper, but what's in that ceiling tile?
Right.
This,
And like, and
this
the
is like
people
when
most
the
impacted by
keep
that
going.
are going to be like, folks who are living in frontline communities, folks who can't afford to have the best kind of
Right.
safety regulations, right? Like it's going to
Right.
be like a class stratification, right? Who has access to safety and who doesn't.
This reminds me too of like just bringing it back to Florida and insurance stuff that like guys like Jeff Brandes who are like evangelists for like deregulating the insurance market, like when you actually really like dig into their plan to make insurance more affordable, it's to let insurance companies sell policies that like won't fix your roof. You can buy junk policy, and yeah, that's affordable. It doesn't do anything for you, right? But that's also sort of what deregulation typically actually means when it's coded in this way.
Right. Right.
Well, let me ask you guys about Florida elections too. Just obviously, it was a pretty significant Republican wave in Florida again, and it was sort of odd because I am curious to get you guys take like 2 years ago we had this Republican wave on like a low turnout election where it seemed like Democratic voters just didn't bother voting. This year was a much higher turnout election, so much different, but still a Republican wave. I'm just kind of curious. Obviously there's a lot of unpacking that still has to be done, but the two of you's early read on what happened and how did Florida shift so red so fast?
Well, I do think part of it is a continuation of the divestment of resources from Florida over the years for partisan campaigns. Obviously, we were able to see money come in for ballot initiatives. The ballot initiatives, both Amendment 3, Amendment 4, were not partisan campaigns. They were
Right.
attempting to reach every type of voter. They were not Democratic turnout machines at all. Even if the issue may resonate with Democrats more than conservatives, we have to remember that campaign operations can be very targeted. So not every Democrat, especially low turnout Democrat, might even see any of those ads to the same degree
Right.
that someone who is targeted would. And I think oftentimes we forget that. So when we throw our opinions, out to see what sticks on results of an election, we have to remember the context that your viewpoint is not going to be necessarily someone else's viewpoint just because of what access information they have. Now, of course, as someone who's run now 4 successful state house campaigns and
Hey.
has worked in a lot of campaigns, the resource gap among state house races is huge. I mean, the Republican Party in one swoop bought $5 million in television ads in our media market for state house races,
Right.
and that was just television. I mean, they were also doing digital and YouTube and so forth. And so you can't overlook once again just the spending on partisan races. And Florida was never in play. Most of us knew that. The fact that the Vice President Harris never came to Florida on the campaign trail, I mean, very clear indicators of that. But I would also argue that we have to go back to basics. One reason why I started a voter registration organization 3 years ago, and we were registering voters on college campuses and community events, and really proud of our team's efforts. In fact, UCF had some of the strongest turnout in its history. But at the end of the day, when we're not able to provide a clear contrast with our opponents, then good luck inspiring people to come out to vote for you. And I go back to this point a lot. But much of the Democratic platform is censored by corporations who contribute to Democratic operations, and oftentimes that ratio is 3-1, right? They're always going to give the majority party more resources, but they'll toss us something to basically kind of buy our silence in some of these issues. And
yeah, it's hush money.
Right. I mean, essentially, and it just leads to an environment where our candidates are not going to talk about the issues that, as we noted earlier, impact the working class because they feel like they can't, or they're going to lose the funder, or worse, turn that funder against them. And that's why I run campaigns, that are overwhelmingly funded by grassroots people and everyday folks who volunteer with us and knock on doors. And that's the last point I'll make is the field dynamic here. I do think one reason why Amendment 4 did better than Amendment 3 was because Amendment 4 had a field operation knocking on doors, active on college campuses for months. That makes a huge difference in getting in front of your base. And that just it was not seen across the board. The closest races had districts that were split between Orange County and a different county, and that's in large part to the work in Orange County, where our DC raised a substantial amount of money and used it on the ground, had mail programs for some of our county commission races that were very under-resourced. So the DC, the Democratic infrastructure locally was not as strong in other counties as ours. And so I also think that resulted in devastating results across the board. And it further reinforces for me the importance of meeting folks where they're at the doors, and of course creating content that's multilingual. Some of our most effective ads this cycle were our Spanish language ads, and I do feel like part of it. Oh yeah, if you look at our YouTube channel, you can actually see the traffic right on our ads. Some of our Spanish language ads had more than 30,000 views. Like they were the most effective and seen ads. And I think part of it is because there just wasn't anyone else doing ads in Spanish. And so ours were just getting pumped up a lot and, probably annoying people to some degree because they kept seeing the same ads all the time.
Whatever works.
Yeah. But I mean, it hits the point where if you're not, you can't raise the resources and communicate to voters, and you don't have a strong field program, and you're going to get wiped out by an operation that's counter to you, that does not care about spreading misinformation and flourishes off it. And of course is amply well-funded compared to us. And so there's still a lot of data to look at. I know our district, we won 2 precincts that went to Trump, and we flipped 5 precincts. But even in Orange County, the Trump footprint did increase. And again, I feel like a part of that is that there just was no clear statewide Democratic apparatus, no clear Democratic voter registration program or field program. And it created the losses and results that we saw.
Yeah. You elaborate on that hush money comment, or jump in with whatever else you want to say.
Yeah, well, I mean, on the hush money piece, what we have is, to Anna's point, you have these corporate donors that donate to the Democratic Party or Democratic candidates, but it leads to candidates being like scared of their own shadow in the sense of not challenging corporate power. And so that essentially allows the wild thing is like watching these Republican House candidate ads, when you have them talking about they will hold big insurance accountable when they were the ones who voted for the insurance bailout. I mean, like there is just no fact checking. It's just blatant lies, but that is what people are being fed, and there's no counter to it. And in many ways, we find that the Democratic Party is just similarly that corporate capture. They feel like they cannot say the things that the base believes in and that like mass majority of people believe in. I mean, you saw that across the country with a lot of different economic ballot initiatives passing across the country, right? And of course, abortion with 57% support. Like these are issues that resonate with people, and we know the solution. Like we know exactly what people need because we listen and we want to respond. But when you just continue to defend the same structures that are putting people into these awful positions, like why are they going to vote for that system, right? But I think the other piece that Anna, that you do so well that I think is really important, it's just that year-round organizing infrastructure. So you do not just show up during election season, right? You are there year-round. We door knock year-round in the community to engage folks, to listen to people, and to deliver, right? Because ultimately, folks not just want to be heard, like deserve to be heard, and like, and that is why you're in public service, right? It's to like respond to needs. And so it's not also talking at people, it's like genuinely being in collaboration and partnership with the community, And so that year-round organizing is really important. And when we have an electorate that is just bombarded with disinformation and like more and more isolation, right? And I joke that I sound like a tin hat girly sometimes. And when you see just like how our media has been like taken over by corporate monopolies, where there's like one man that controls a platform now called X, that is like a essential place of our political discourse, right? Like people are living in echo chambers, and like your algorithm is not just like, oh, these are things that I love. It's custom for me. It's like, no, research shows that like young men get violent content, young women get things like makeup and hair. Like people are designing these things to put us into like certain ideologies and certain communities and certain bubbles. And like I have found, as someone who door knocks a lot, that like the most effective way to burst that disinformation bubble is just to be at someone's door and just be like, hey, how are you? Like, I care about you. I want to hear what is going on in your life and how we can help. And all of a sudden, that sense of just like humanity that we're building, it gets people out of that like mind control that really is big tech that, as we see with the Trump administration, is just going to get worse. I mean, you've got Elon Musk right there. And so the sense of like that year-round organizing and building that community and combating the isolation that folks feel is so essential to just building that long-term power. And so like I think that the hard truth is like the answer is easy. We have the playbook. It just takes a lot of hard work and it's long-term work. And I think for a lot of folks, they don't want to do that. And they think, oh, if I just pay an ad or if I just do that, it'll fix it. I think that's the other thing too, is that our democratic infrastructure here in Florida has been very much outsourced to predatory consultants that win either way. They get a relatively large cut when there's a media buy, and when there's field, they don't. And so I think there's also a habit of yielding towards certain tactics because they're more profitable and maybe easier, but they don't actually lead to the results, which again, like, I talk a lot about like, I'm not for the left or for the right. I'm for the bottom. I'm coming for the top. Like, we need to build a working families like movement, and the work that we're doing in Orange County reflects that, where folks are, really coming together to engage in their government in ways to build like the communities that we deserve, right? And so there's like so many reasons, but I think that year-round piece is really essential because it's not that sort of like typical transactional politics where you only come to my door when you need me. It's like, no, we're here year round to build community and build something beautiful together.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I just want to highlight a few key points from what Ida said to summarize. So one is the
Thanks,
notion,
doctor. We appreciate that.
I got you.
Wow.
I got you.
You know what? Why don't you just host the show?
Yeah. So, I mean, I
stand ready for any questions.
This is a coup, Jason. Actually, that's why we're here.
We're actually going to take over your podcast and make her.
God.
We're going to change the name. We're going to change the name.
Yeah, to one that people understand.
Okay.
But I will say, wait, before you summarize on it, I just have to say, I'm very grateful that Jason taught me what rent seeking was, because it's something we see all the time.
You're welcome.
But I was, very happy to be empowered with that information. When you launched this podcast, I thought, there is a housing crisis, so it's not really Jason's expertise, but I'm glad he's leaned in. But now I understand.
He can help us seek low-cost rents.
As a renter, I appreciate it.
That's not what he's doing. That's not what I'm doing. First of all, I don't believe for a second that this wasn't a premeditated attack of some kind. And also, I'm not like thrilled that like a recurring bit on this show is becoming attacking a name that is, just to be clear, wonderful and informative.
You got to give the people what they want. Dr. Eskamani, you were making an essential point, I believe.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. So I was reading the Tampa Bay Times. They had one of their post-election, debriefs and postmortems. And Representative Cross, who had a really tough race, Republicans went after her aggressively. She made the point that Ida was alluding to, or Ida was stressing, was you need candidates that are committed 24/7. Because in a state as hostile as Florida, where Democrats are always going to be underfunded and underestimated, you do have to be active in your community 24/7. A lot of folks, would text me after November 5th, oh, we're taking time off, and oh, go celebrate. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like I am back on my email. We're working. Like, we have community events, we have constituent services, and actually, the Sunday after Tuesday, I was speaking at a community event called Maker Fair, and one of the folks in the audience came up to me, and he was wearing a Boone High School T-shirt, which is in my district. And so we started talking, and ended up he is waiting for a property tax refund. And I won't go into the details, but I was like, oh, I can totally help you. Here's my email. Send me a note. And in the conversation, he was like, well, and I didn't vote for you. I'm on the other side. And I was like, oh, that's fine. Send me an email, and we actually already have his situation solved, and he'll be getting a big refund check from tax collector's office. That's
great, yeah.
For his property taxes. So to Ida's point, it's like you have to be active 24/7, even when you are exhausted and tired, and God knows I am. You just have to keep going. But I think also part of this conversation is pulling back the veil on what it takes to run a good campaign, because a lot of folks just don't know those mechanics.
Right.
And for example, I got an email today, someone who is, and I mean, their points are good, basically speaking to the fact that, the right-wing infrastructure around communications is much stronger, more robust. I mean, we know there's been so much conversation about the Joe Rogan podcast and all these different predominantly white male influencers, right? That appeal to conservative values. And why don't we have a democratic alternative? And part of the problem is the lack of funding. And there just is not funding for more progressive voices, because we are advocating to have a more fair tax structure, which is one that major wealthy people don't want. So of course they're not going to amplify our voices. So like we're always operating in a situation of being outspent and being underestimated. But that means you gotta get creative. You have to put the hours aside to do this work. And I was walking this constituent through like just what the time that we put into it. It's another full-time job just to create content online. And you know this too, Jason, because you're doing it with Seeking Rents, spent the name. And, it just further demonstrates like this labor that we have to put into reaching people. It's a lot. It is a lot. It's a lot to maintain. And of course, we're competing with individuals who just not only have more resources, but candidly, the more vitriolic their rhetoric, then the algorithms reward it more. So if I post something about taxes, it doesn't get the same traction as if I post something about Trump. It just doesn't. And so we also have to get creative to find ways for our content to reach more people without always wanting to fit into the category of conspiracy theories, because that does the best on the internet these days. And so I highlight these kind of operational pieces because we can talk about the reasons why we lost, but my head goes towards like, how can we win?
Right.
And there is this big question mark around like finding the right candidates, finding the resources to communicate for the right candidates. But I do want to give flowers to Orange County, because at the county commission level, our county races, and these are, technically nonpartisan races, but our winning candidates overwhelmingly were willing to challenge large corporations. They campaigned on challenging the status quo with the tourism industry and with developers. And very brave in doing that, because those are not easy positions to take, especially in Orange County. And yet voters rewarded them for that. And I think that is a very important takeaway for a lot of us, especially in Central Florida.
I just want to echo that. I mean, like, I think there's that fear that you mentioned, like getting primaried, getting like a bunch of corporate money against you, like all these things. And those fears could certainly come to fruition, but the way that like people power cannot be bought, right? Like they're trying to buy what we're building. And like ultimately, if you're building the thing that serves the community does show up. But to your point, it takes a lot of hard work to do. And sometimes it's a long arc, right? And I always remind people like, and Anna, this better than anybody with all like your years of work in reproductive justice. Like when we won Roe like 40 years ago, so, like the far right didn't just say, oh, okay, we lost. I guess we'll just pack up and go home, or we'll moderate our message. Like we're not gonna, we just won't get this thing. Like, no, they came together, they made a plan, and it was a decades-long one that they executed. And so in the sense of like for us having to keep the faith, to analyze the data, see what worked, see what didn't, and figure it out. That is just the necessary work. But it's constantly frustrating when it feels like you're up against not just the right wing like infrastructure, but also corporations embedded into the infrastructure that should be aligned, right? And so that is just a constant deterrent from building the power that we know we can. But that it's incredibly hard to compete with the disinformation machine, because to your point, Anna, it's so robust and well funded, and it's designed to undercut the agenda that we have when it comes to making sure corporations and billionaires pay their taxes and workers have basic rights and wages are fair, and we have all these like things that are so popular, right, and that people need. But I continue to think that like field and like the year-round organizing at the doors in the community is the way that you sort of like disrupt that that media machine, in addition to needing our own media infrastructure. But like that's incredibly hard to compete with. But the thing, that human connection and that sense of just like building community, because their machine is designed to make you feel isolated, alone, right? And so how do we combat that? And it's really about building community. Like their model of power is hands in the very elite few, and it's very much like finite resources, and you have to fight for it, and like other people are taking things away from you, right? And like it's designed to drive you into isolation. Whereas like our model of power is hands, like power is within all of us, and like we all should have a say, and like we want to build like from the me to the we, right? All these things. And so when you have that as like your North Star, it leads you to a totally different kind of like just organizing infrastructure and the way you spend your money and things like that.
Could it be like one question I have for you guys as people who do this work? It is, look, let me tell a story. So I was looking at some data recently about insurance industry contributions and like, property insurance contributions. And there was like 5 companies that had spent more than $1 million in this election cycle or something like that. That's directionally accurate. I don't have the data in front of me, but like going through that data and seeing the number of Democrats that have been taking money from the property insurance industry, it's like 8-1 Republicans, but still the idea that like we have the Democratic Party or Democratic candidates that would take money from what is literally the number one corporate villain in Florida right now. And the message that like is most sort of resonant with folks, I think, in Florida right now has always like it astounded me that you would do that. Or then you just look through like, the party's fundraising reports. You see like Walmart is in there, right? This is the party that's supposed to be fighting for, workers to have like higher wages and better benefits and fairer schedules, the exact sort of things that Walmart lobbies against. And it all this ties into what you guys have been talking about, how some of that holds up to build people's ability to call out villains or to push for policies or to, find funding for, platforms that amplify this. Where I'm headed to this in this long-winded way. Is it possible? Like, I've often thought like Democrats in Florida should just cut off corporate money and just say, we're not taking it. And yeah, you're going to lose some of the money you're getting right now. But I mean, just from like the attention maybe you get from that could offset that and maybe start to spur real excitement with grassroots donors. But the question here is that like a feasible approach? Could it be as simple as like, or not as simple, but could cutting off corporate money, is that like a feasible way to build power in a state like Florida? And you know what, Adam, I'm going to send that to you because this feels like one of the areas that you've been working on with Six.
Well, I think the answer is yes, but I will say a couple things, right? So I think Anna's a model of this as a candidate that does not take those dollars and fundraises a lot independently from the grassroots, and who runs like really successful campaigns that has like an amazing grassroots support, right? And so I think that is like the ultimate direction. It's incredibly hard though. That's the thing, to Anna's point. It's very hard to do. So but I think the fact is what is for the Democratic Party, what they're doing now is not working, right? Okay. And so it is they need to do something different. And this to me feels like the very clear answer is that in this election, the Trump campaign villainized and scapegoated every single community except corporations and billionaires for the economic struggles that folks are feeling that is direct cause of corporations and billionaires and their unchecked power. And there was no counter villain. There was no counter narrative. There wasn't a strong one. There was some, right? And that was the thing that was really frustrating to me too, is that, the Biden administration has been their Federal Trade Commission and the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice and the Worker Labor Board have been doing really groundbreaking work around challenging corporate monopolies, taking on some of the biggest corporations, not just in the country, but in the world, like Amazon and all these big tech companies, and just doing amazing work, supporting workers' right to organize across the country. But those weren't mantles that I was seeing on a national platform. We did see revenue taxes, which was good to see, but it wasn't enough. And also the narrative like just jumped around all these things, right? But to the sense of for the Democratic Party here in Florida, I mean, I think it's never one thing. I think that's a piece that folks are looking for an easy solution, right? It's not one thing. I think we have to recognize like it's rarely an or in life. It's an and. That's just the harsh reality of it. So it's an and, but absolutely a platform that centers working families and takes on these corporate Goliaths that are constantly exploiting us, that are constantly taking our tax dollars and wasting them. Like that to me seems like an obvious pillar of what the solution looks like. And the status quo is just not going to work. And that I think is the reality too. But I continue to do what I can to organize and to support like the causes and things that I care about. But I do think that it requires something different. And I think that challenging corporate power is not only the piece that is reflective of the Democratic Party base, but it's also the thing that helps to build like across communities from rural to urban to suburban. Like I say this a lot, like white supremacy is a very dangerous pyramid scheme, right? Because it's dangerous and violent and awful, but it essentially promises like white working class folks things that they will have that ultimately the most elite will only have, right? There is a system, like they will have more than Black and brown folks. Like the disparities are entrenched into our system, but we can all have much more if we band together and take on those Goliaths, right? And so it's like this pyramid scheme. You're being like lied to, right? You're being manipulated to think, oh, I'll have all these things if I exclude all these people, right? But the best, most effective way to sort of like to demystify that promise, like make a racist voter to like a class solidarity voter is like by challenging corporate power and really teaching like these are the things we're up against together. Because it's the same villains that are exploiting immigrant workers and white workers and Black workers and all the intersections therein. We're up against the same infrastructure. And I'm sure you've talked about this before on this podcast, but the far right is
seeking rents.
Yeah. The far right is a massive infrastructure, right? And you saw a lot of the names like on Project 2025, a lot of them have been operating here in Florida for a long time. Some of them are headquartered here in Florida, but it is a network of extremist think tanks, corporations, billionaires, part of a wide network that are really ultimately set on creating a permanent obedient underclass in this country that is based on the intersections of race and class and gender. And so that is like we have a shared villain. And we've got to name it. We've got to do that. Because like in organizing 101, you have to have a tangible villain. You got to have a villain you can like touch and taste and feel. And so when it comes to the political parties, I mean, the Republicans chose villains of like historically already disenfranchised communities, right? Trans folks, immigrants, Black folks, women, like that was their villain. And on the Democratic Party side, it wasn't always clear, or it was Trump. Trump's the villain, right? And then when you come to this pace around like, we need to save democracy. I think for a lot of people, they see this current system not serving them. And so why would they vote to defend it? And I think it's pretty like accepted. We have very much an oligarchy in this country in the sense of like, when you look at all the ways that the ultra wealthy influence our elections and our legislative policy, like we're fighting to create a democracy, but we're constantly being undercut in those efforts. And so there's a lot to unpack there. But yeah, I think that challenging corporate power is one pillar of the solution. Absolutely. And it's like necessary. It's literally what we need to do to create the state that people dream of. And again, these are issues that have won across the country. And the way that other states have done this, like I think Minnesota is a great example. They created an antitrust department in their attorney general's office to help combat like corporate concentration and mergers. They also states across the country have paid family medical leave. They've created baby bonds to create wealth for working families. There's all these really innovative things that states are doing across the country that are not only popular, but also achieving our goal, which is to create a country that ensures opportunity for all. That's the North Star that we need to continue to fight for.
Right.
So I just want to quickly add these data points contrasting where money comes from between parties and candidates is very important to educate everyday voters, because it also exposes how the Republican Party is not populist. And so I really think more of that data, the better. And though, of course, Democrats do take money from these different places, I'm sure that if you look at the average contribution, it's probably going to be still a much smaller number for Democrats than it is for Republicans, which also demonstrates what party is closer to populism, closer to the people. And so I think that data is very, very important just as a tool to convey to voters what is the party that's more transactional than the other. But of course, part of that is the fact that, Democrats just aren't raising a lot of money from other places.
Right.
So if you are going to make a statement that is bold in that way to just cut off corporate contributions, you better have the infrastructure and the trained candidates to get money from somewhere else, because you still need dollars to compete. And no one's even going to know that you made that decision unless you communicate that to them. And maybe you'll hear it from earned media, but as we all know, we talked about, most of our voters are not reading the paper. They're not getting news from traditional formats. And if it's not seen as controversial, the news might not even cover it. And so a part of it is training. We have to train candidates of how to raise money from other places. But let me tell you, that's not possible when you have party officials telling us not to say no to corporate giving. I mean, and I have been instructed by party leaders before that I should not name companies. Like if I have a bill that, FPL supported, I can't say FPL, which of course I say FPL. I'm not going to censor myself, but I've literally been instructed to not use corporate titles because it could hurt their fundraising.
Right.
And so, right, but that's the pressure that, many of us face and many of us are instructed. But it's also the advice that freshman lawmakers are getting. I mean, I've left caucus meetings because I'm just sick of this advice. And, I want to choose my battles. So instead of creating a scene, I just get up and leave. And I think me leaving is message enough to people that I don't agree with this advice that you're giving. And you're feeding into a machine that does not serve us, as Ida already mentioned. And I hope this will be a reckoning for that, hey, the way that you're doing things is not working. And so we need a dramatic reset in every shape or form. But I also think you have to be strategic that, instead of cutting all corporate money, why did you start with a sector of maybe industrial polluters? Pick an obvious sector that clearly is bad for,
Mosaic was just like, who, me?
Right. I mean, pick a sector that is very easy to contrast with your opposition and very easy to communicate to the voters. And I think, in Orange County, tourism and development are clear ones because everyone feels the stress of these industries in their daily lives. And so, of course, I'd love to see, complete cutaway of corporate giving, but I'm also a practical person. And I think that you start with where you can communicate the strongest to leverage that decision to raise more money. And I do that all the time. I will do an email blast to my followers that says, I rejected this check, or I don't take money from this place. Can you help us make up the difference? Or look at my opponent's fundraising and I'll see, they took money from tobacco. Let me tell my supporters that, so they make up the difference. So, there are creative ways you can leverage this contrast if you're willing to accept the contrast. But at the end of the day, I do think that, like Ida said, it's deeper than just one answer.
Right.
And you do have to recruit candidates that will do the labor. I mean, my campaigns start the second they end. And, we're hosting, we hosted our campaign kickoff for 2024 fall of last year, September of last year. Wow, and then we started knocking on doors. That's, prior to that, we started knocking on doors in summer of last year. And so, again, it goes back to having to do the work and the labor in order to reach the number of voters you need to reach when you don't have the same type of resources. But we definitely need to expand the more ideologically supported donors and move away from the transactional donors. And I think everyone knows that, but they just haven't put in the labor to make that a reality. And they're still not willing to say no to certain corporations and make that contrast more clear.
Right. If I could add one thing to that contrast too, I was reflecting on, thank you, the rent control ballot initiative that we had in Orange County. That was a very scrappy effort. We were absolutely outspent, and the ads that were popping up on people's TVs and online with just all this misinformation about what that initiative would do and what it meant, were just outrageous, and we couldn't compete with them, right? But they were so outrageous that there were earned media opportunities to debunk it, right? So there was some free media with local news, and they would say, "Is this not true?" And we'd be able to say, "No, it's not," and everyone should vote yes on this, right? And so even though we were incredibly outspent, that initiative won. And of course, the apartment association and the corporate landlord industry were, they not only tried to defeat it in the courts, but ultimately preempted it in a bill that Dr. Representative Eskamani voted against. But but that's why we don't have rent control in Orange County right now. We can't have in any part in the state. But that, and many examples of like when you are centering working families in your agenda, you will probably be outspent. But it costs a lot of money to sort of basically misinform people about these issues that people know in their guts and hearts, this is what I want.
Right.
So even though you will be outspent, when you embrace this agenda that people voted you to do, right? Like you are on the power is on your side, and you can win when you really embrace this agenda and work hard towards it. To Anna's point, I think that's a piece too. Like a talking point is not going to win anything. Like it takes hard work. You got to be out there in the community, and so that's just like another essential piece to what needs to happen.
Yeah, and I'm going off memory, but like on the rent control initiative, and for folks that aren't familiar with it, this was a couple of years ago, a countywide referendum to do 1 year of emergency rent control, rent stabilization in Orange County. If memory serves, two lobbies, the apartment lobby and the realtor lobby, spent more than $3 million against that. Again, this is a county election, more than $3 million against it. And to my knowledge, there was not a significant paid campaign on the other side at all.
No.
Right. And yet it still passed with almost 70% of the vote. It was like the most popular thing on the ballot by a mile, right? So it is like, it is a very clear example that like ideas meant to help bottom up economic ideas is kind of the way I sort of think of them. They actually can trump big money in different ways. Trump, pun not intended. Well, let me try and spin this forward a little bit. Looking ahead, now we're in this new reality, sort of getting ready now. The next sort of thing on the calendar in Florida is the next legislative session. As you sort of look ahead, one of the dynamics I'm sort of interested in is like so much of Ron DeSantis's, playbook has been picking fights with people. And for the last couple of years, he's had the Biden administration to do that with, to pick fights and sort of try and post up that way. That's obviously not going to be there. So it feels to me like he's going to be looking for different people to pick fights with again. And there's a bunch of other issues. I've been writing on the newsletter a bit about like there's a number of sugar industry issues that look like they're going to pop up in Tallahassee this year. I sort of made a joking comment to Mosaic. Mosaic's got a few issues that dealing with its waste that look like it's going to be back in the legislature. For you guys, as you sort of look ahead over the next few months, what are some of the battles you're sort of preparing for? What are some of the issues you sort of think might hold promise for championing? Just sort of curious your take on sort of the policy landscape ahead in Florida.
I mean, it's unprecedented and uncertain, that's for sure. I think if DeSantis doesn't have a Biden administration to pick on, he has to pick on someone else.
Right.
So I suspect it'll be a continuation of targeting immigrant community members and trans people and really just kind of, unfortunately, reflecting what Trump campaigned on and amplifying that at a Florida level once more. So I think we'll continue to see that path towards extremism find its foot in the legislature. I'm also preparing for more attacks on reproductive rights, despite Amendment 4 securing 57% of the vote. I don't think that's going to stop Republicans from trying to do more restrictions, whether it's on reproductive rights in the context of abortion or going after contraception. I do suspect more battles in that arena. When it comes to issues that our constituents want us to champion, I mean, there's a huge need to revisit the assessment for condos. We have many constituents who are struggling right now with the reality of those new expenses, alongside, of course, property insurance. And so I'm hearing more and more concerns about car insurance. So I know I'll be doing my part and working with my caucus on uplifting these bottom-up economic needs and policies, but it'll be very interesting to see as we get back to Tallahassee just what the tone is. There's a lot of course, new members coming in both chambers and a lot of folks who subscribe to that Trump agenda. So I worry about the continued nationalization of our state politics because of everyone's own personal ambitions. And oftentimes, a lot of folks look at the state house as a stepping stool. They don't necessarily see it as a people's chamber. And so I wish I had a crystal ball to provide more specifics, but obviously we'll be back in Tallahassee and start filing bills, and that'll give us a better perspective of what is to come.
Yeah, I think I'll say this, DeSantis picks on people or entities, but it's scapegoating. And it's a
Right.
classic tactic of the right wing. And it's what Donald Trump does. I mean, just it's a classic divide and conquer tactic to blame something else for the things that you're doing or your allies are doing, right? And so this playbook is, I think, I just always want to push back in the sense of like, not that's what folks are implying, but like Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are billionaires to this like infrastructure. I'm sorry, they're puppets to this infrastructure of billionaires, right? And so they're just like racing for groveling for those dollars, right? And so their playbook is like when you read history in this country and other countries, scapegoating is pretty typical tactic. And so he'll definitely find someone to pick on, to Anna's point. It can be immigrants and trans folks. It could also be blue states. It could be China. It could be, it's going to be something, right? He's always going to find somebody to blame so he doesn't take responsibility for his actions. That is, the coward's playbook of right-wing leadership. And so there's that. And to the piece, like, states like Florida, Texas, they are laboratories for that infrastructure. And so many of the things that have come through Florida, we then see pop up in other states across the country. And so that'll continue. So I do think in the sense of like, there's things we have not seen yet that will pop up in Florida is true. I think we will continue to see the abusive preemptions.
Right.
So like any good local idea that local communities and local electeds have done, it's going to be at risk, not just in Florida, but in other states too. And so there's been a lot of amazing work around holding AI accountable and private equity and all those kind of things, right? And so I know I'm certainly tracking and looking at things like that can pop up in Florida. There's been a lot of really amazing programs that, provide guaranteed income and all these things. And we're seeing those preemptions pop up around the country. And so, again, these are like created in this infrastructure of think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and ALEC and all these different entities. And so assuming we'll see things like that pop up in Florida, the continued weaponization of state agencies to cause harm rather than serving the public. I think attacks on ballot initiatives have been consistent over years, but I think
they
we should
sort of
continue.
telegraphed that one during the Amendment 4 campaign too.
That's right. Exactly. So I think we should be on the lookout for more of that. And I think also I think public education, higher education, I don't think we've seen we've not seen the worst of it. I think there's going to be more fights and assaults on that, which Anna has been an incredible leader on. And so those are, I think, some of the things that I know are on my mind when I think about it. And I think and we have lived through a Trump administration with Ron DeSantis, right? And so we also do have some clues in kind of like that behavior and those actions. But I think to Anna's point, it's a very unprecedented time, like what we're experiencing right now.
It's not the same, right? Because now you have tension between DeSantis and Trump. I mean,
That's right.
DeSantis would go to the White House with his little, like whiteboard displays or whatever.
Yeah.
Florida's response to COVID. That's not going to happen. So, I mean,
it's a really good point on it. Yes. And I think that's another piece of like evidence to the thing that I believe, which is, again, these men are just puppets to a bigger power infrastructure, because even though they don't like each other, they're doing the same things.
Right.
And Project 2025, I think, was one of the most recent obvious examples around like, oh yeah, this is like a very coordinated effort, because everything they have here, they're already doing in states. All these organizations, they might pretend like they don't work together in the states, right? Because you have like, oh, here's the anti-LGBTQ stuff, here's like the public ed stuff, here's the anti-worker stuff. But like, no, they have the same unified agenda. And I think when it comes to the left, broadly speaking, that need to build solidarity and to have like a unified agenda and vision, which I continue to believe like challenging corporate and billionaire power and advancing prosperity for working families is that unifying theme, regardless of like what community you belong to. Like that is the thing that brings us together. And when you center personal stories, whether you are trans, an immigrant, Black person, white person, rural, urban, or the intersections of, because we live like multifaceted lives and identities. But when you just distill down to our personal stories, like we all want the same things, we have the same values, right? And so that's like the beautiful thing about centering directly impacted people is like it actually emphasizes our similarities, right? Like, and brings us together. When you like really center in who we are and all the different identities we hold, we actually realize like how much we have in common with each other. And that's why storytelling is so important in our work, and why folks need to come up to the Capitol and share their stories and do also organize in the districts. But I think that I don't even know where I went to that. I just got so lost in how beautiful storytelling is. But
Well, it's great.
I remember the sense of building like a people-centered agenda and how essential that is in doing all the things that we dream of doing. And that our opponents will continue to work to dismantle that and divide and conquer us however they can.
That makes sense. That probably seems like a good spot to end. Is a little bit more uplifting than some of the stuff we talked about. I do want to at some point I want to dive more deeply with some of you guys into some of those stuff. I like preemption is one that I think I mean, increasingly occurring to me that we've only really seen the beginnings of of just how far they're willing to go with preemption in Florida, and that seems to be a subject too that at least the readers and the people that I interact with across political spectrums are reacting to in a way that, like, there is some cross partisan sort of solidarity with the idea that, like, people don't like a bigger government telling them what they can do locally, right? And so but maybe that can
And
be
it's corporate greed again. I mean,
right.
preemption is backed by corporations. I mean,
Absolutely.
goes back to that same narrative.
Yeah, and I think we are going to see like federal preemption dictating state agendas. And there's a distinction of abusive preemption versus non-abusive preemption, right? Because preemption itself is a neutral tool. So like, clean air standards, that's a great preemption. The Voting Rights Act, that's a great preemption. But generally we see a preemption abused in state legislators, and to Anna's point, abused by corporate lobbyists and the intersections of more and more right-wing extremism as well. And so yes, that abuse, Florida is one of like the main laboratories of that we've seen across the country. I'd say Florida, Texas, Tennessee are generally sort of the lead on that, but also not immune in blue states either when it comes to corporate greed and abusive preemption as well.
Well, you guys will have to come back to the show, and we'll dive more deeply into that. But thank you both for doing this. I really that was a fascinating conversation. It went in directions I wasn't even expecting, but I learned a lot.
Happy to help. Back to work now.
No, this was, I mean, like we said, this is a coup. So we're gonna need the passwords and things later.
No, I fully seized control back. Just FYI, I've never been more control of a podcast in my life.
We'll just have to start our own podcast, right?
Let us know in the comments if you want us to start our own podcast. These two tired women in Orlando, Florida are a little grumpy today, but happy to be here. Let us know.
Wow. I'm like inadvertently creating a competitor here. This is wild.
Well, as someone who believes that, in competitive markets, I think that's a great idea.
Wow. Yeah, the more competition, the better.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, sure. We'll see. We'll see. It could get pretty ruthless. Just be warned.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
All right. Well, thank you both again, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you very soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for listening.
Keep up the fight.
And be safe, be well. See you.
See you soon. Okay, thank you once again to Anna and Ida Eskamani. Just before we go, once again, make sure to click the like and subscribe buttons. And again, if you've heard anything in this conversation that strikes any thoughts, or you've got any other sort of observations, please make sure to leave a comment. Until then, we'll see you again very soon.